Hello, hello, Brian. Welcome to the Mentally a Badass podcast. I'm so happy to have you today.
Looking forward to jamming with you today, my friend.
I'm excited to hear your story. Like as I was looking up about you, we're going to be talking about your story of how you got ran over by a truck. When I read that, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be I need to know more about this." And then first I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's I felt like I was like, oh my god, that's so horrible. But honestly, you overcame that because clear as we're here, we're gonna be talking about it. So I want to open up and talk first about that story. So you were 7
Yep.
years old, right?
Yeah. I was
Okay,
7
so
years
let's
old.
talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. 7 years old. And my mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to just get a 1 inch paintbrush. It was August 10th of 1992. It was a
Mhm.
115-degree day, about 6:10 p.m. And as we get to the car, this is back in the days before there was key fobs. So I had to wait for my mom to literally reach in her purse, grab the keys, pull it out, stick it in the door, turn it on before we go on with our way. And I was standing by the car waiting for her and my brother, which were 3 or 4 feet behind me. As I was standing next to the car, a truck pulls up in front of the store and parks. The driver and the middle passenger get out. And the passenger all the way to the right in the passenger seat felt the truck moving backwards. So Justine, he did what any one of us would do, and he scooted over to put his foot on the brake. But instead, he hit the gas.
I was just thinking
Yeah.
that.
Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, up on the dashboard. And before you know it, he's catapulting 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at me with no time to react. Goes up and over the median, hits the tree in the median, hits our car, throws me to the ground, runs over me diagonally, literally running over my stomach, tearing my spleen and leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, and continuing on to completely sever my left arm from my body. And the next thing my mom hears is my brother's voice. He's 14 months older than me, and he points and says, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there." And as she gazes up to see where he's pointing, she sees a string of muscle cooking like hamburger on the parking lot, and then my arm about 10 feet away. Fortunately for me, there was a nurse there that day. I call her kind of my guardian angel, but she saw the literal life and limb scenario that took place in front of her, and she made a choice in that moment to go into action. She came over and stopped the bleeding on the main wound and ultimately saved my life. And she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and fill it with ice to get my detached limb on ice within minutes. Because obviously, a 115-degree day, it's not going to live very long without
Yeah,
it.
the timing
Um,
of
and
that.
and so, I said for a long time that I was forever indebted to this woman
Hmm.
for her choice to go into action. And that was reinforced 2 years ago when I met her for the very first time, 30 years after the injury, and found out that she had a friend with her that day. And their friend was also a nurse who had all the same sets of skills, all the same sets of training, but instead she turned her head and went on with her way. Now, I want to be really clear. I'm not upset. I don't have any resentment. I've got no
Hmm.
malintent. That was well within her right to choose to not go into action. But it also
Yeah.
reinforces the importance of making a choice to help other people in a moment and what that ripple effect can look like.
Yeah.
Right. And so I realize my story is unique. But what I've also learned in all of this time is that every single one of our stories is unique. What
Hmm.
becomes important is how do we learn to pause long enough to extract the lessons we can from our own stories, and how do we become intentional in how we start applying those moving forward. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. And that's hopefully what I'm here to help do today, is to just shed some light and
Hmm.
the highs and the lows and all of the above with my experience that's kind of gotten me to where I am today and how I help other people.
Yeah, we're definitely I'm gonna be learning a lot from you. I love learning from all my guests. Like it honestly it's kind of like therapy to me. I want to know your initial like reaction. Were you in shock? I guess like when
I
it
was in and
happened,
out
you
of the
probably like,
consciousness the whole time. I don't remember anything on the site.
oh, okay. I had a
Yeah, I was in and out
feeling.
of consciousness the whole time. Yeah. I the first memories I have are waking up in the hospital and
Okay.
being a little bit in a dream. So no, I have no recollection of the exact day. I only know the stories. That's something that's not lost on me either though, because my mom and my brother have very vivid memories from that day. Right. And they
Yeah, the
saw and
trauma.
witnessed all of this in a way that I didn't have to, even though I was the one that experienced it. So yeah, but no, I don't have any recall from it.
Okay, so at least you didn't have to like be awake and just suffering. I because that sound I like that would sound horrible. So when you got taken to the hospital, I'm curious to know how like you because you had a lot of surgeries.
Mhm.
So I'm curious. So they brought you to the hospital, and then they brought your arm, and then they guess they I don't
Yeah, it
know.
was a little more complicated than that. Back then, I mean, this was 1992. There were not a ton of specialists that could even perform such an operation.
Hmm.
The very first step was they got me to a local smaller hospital to stop all the internal bleeding and save my life. That was the very first piece. And then the next step was to find a surgeon who might be able to actually address this issue. There were only 3 surgeons in Phoenix at the time that were capable of performing such a surgery, and one was out of town. Another had just worked a 12-hour day and declined to operate. And then fortunately, my surgeon, Dr. Mark Gottlieb, had worked a 12-hour day, but he saw a 7-year-old kid and wanted to give him a fighting chance. So he went immediately into action, but with a lot of intention. You know, he was brilliant and frankly very, very responsible for the fact that I not only have an arm today, but that I have a functioning arm today because of the path that he saw. But there was hospital rights, right? Contracting issues. And so I sat on a helipad for about 10 hours after they stopped the internal bleeding with my arm on ice,
Mhm.
no arm for 10 to 12 hours after the injury before they even began to start to reassemble it. The nice thing about what that took place with is that he had the foresight very early on to realize that this wasn't going to be a 1, 2, 3, or 4 surgery type of reconstruction. He knew it was going to be closer to 15, 20, 25 surgeries. And so he came into this with a plan to already start anticipating the future work that would need to take place. So, you know, the very first thing they do in this situation is stabilize the bone. The surgeons took pictures of my arm on the surgery table before it was reattached. And then they took a secondary picture once they reattached the bone. So the orthopedic surgeon came in and did his work. And then Mark Gottlieb, who's a wound specialist, did all the soft tissue work. But in the very
Mhm.
first surgery, he's not only already starting to map out the circulation, which veins need to be pulled to make sure this works, the muscles, right? They took the half of my lat initially to wrap the bone because all the muscle in my arm was just destroyed and they needed to wrap it with something. That lat
Mhm.
died. So they needed to go in and take another half. So I have no lat on the left side of my arm. I still
Um,
today don't have a tricep on the left side of my arm. But he started flagging and tagging nerves and veins and things within the arm in the initial surgery, knowing that when it would start to heal itself, they would be near unidentifiable in a future surgery if he reopened me. So he literally was tagging things with the intention of how he would rebuild the arm over the course of the following 5 years. And that's what he did. I mean, my muscle today in my arm, my bicep, is actually my gracilis from my leg. It's one of the 3 muscles on each leg that pull your legs together. So I can bend my arm, but I have no tricep. So if I pick it up, it will fall and it will hit me. I can't put any external force, but I can actually manipulate my arm to move it around. But it was very intensive and frankly, just very lucky because he's one of the top surgeons that does this type of work still today in this world.
mhm.
And this was 33 years ago when technology certainly wasn't the same, but he had a vision, he had the foresight, and he had the courage to take something on again for the benefit of me,
Mhm.
and my ability to have some level of quality of life and use of my left arm.
Yeah, I want to talk about quality of life. For the reason I asked is because, at least like for me growing up, so I have my right eye has glaucoma, and they had to take out my human lens as a baby. So you probably can't really see too much now, like through the video. But if you look closer, like one eye is pretty much bigger than the other.
Yeah,
And
I actually can tell on the video just slightly.
really,
Uh huh.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't say that with like it's something you need to be concerned about. It's just I actually could notice just in terms of like the slight nuance in your face. But that's I also read people. So it would make sense I would pick up on the nuances that maybe others might not see.
Yeah, a lot of people when I tell them, they're like, "Oh, I had no idea." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I don't know if you're saying that just to make me feel better, but with growth, so I've always had that. So I was born with like a genital cataract, and so they had to take out the human lens. And growing up, I got bullied because they would call me like cross-eyed and all those
Mhm.
mean things. Did you experience bullying? And if you did, like how did you cope with that?
Yeah, I absolutely experienced bullying. It was a big part of things that I had to overcome. You know, there's lots of ways to look at it, and I have to say that it starts even before the interactions with kids, right? I mean, when I first came out of the hospital, I had a teddy bear in between my arm because my humerus needed to heal at 90 degrees. It needed to be out from the body, and I was cute, right? And I was in a sling, and so inevitably, people would come up and ask me what happened to me. And very early, you know, the first semester after the injury, which took place in August, the first semester of that year, which I was in second grade, I actually had an at-home tutor because I wasn't ready to go back to school given all of the surgeries and everything that was taking place. And but in the early phases, when people would ask me, right, even in these early months, what happened to you? I'd look them deadpan in the eye and I'd say I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. And they would pause immediately and they would turn to my parents for validation, which told me what? They didn't believe me. They didn't
Yeah,
believe my
that was
own
my thought
story,
right
no matter
there.
how audacious it's too audacious. That can't be real. And then my parents would validate it. And then all of a sudden it's like they're in this shock and awe. But I started to believe really early that no one was going to believe me. No one was going to believe my story, even though I'm living and wearing it as we speak, right? That they aren't going to believe me. And then those same people would view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, which would immediately put a whole bunch of limitations on top of me. Tell me all the things I was and wasn't going to be able to do for the rest of my life. And I did not like that. And then when I go back to school, because I needed some additional assistance, I was put into an environment with a teacher that had knowledge of dealing with special needs kids. But ultimately, it also put me into a category of being viewed as a special needs kid, even in categories that were beyond physical. Right. So I wasn't allowed to go to recess for those first couple of that whole first year of second grade. I had to stay in the room with another kid who was born with muscular dystrophy and was in a mobilized wheelchair. And in a lot of respects, like our two realities were so different, but yet we were bucketed into the same kind of thought process in terms of
Yeah.
how our peers interacted with us. And so, there was lots of terms that would be thrown at me, ones that I don't use today just because I don't believe in the use of the language. But, I would be called a retard. It had nothing to do with my intellectual ability. It had nothing to do with the way that I was operating, everything to do with my body. But because I looked different, it was scary. Right. And
Yeah.
so in second, third, fourth, and fifth grade, those were probably the years that it was the worst. There was a lot of bullying because of what was not understood. And also a lot of things that I wasn't able to actually develop and heal and process through in those periods because I wasn't at that point in my journey. But yes, there was a lot of bullying that took place up even through middle school, some in high school. Right. I would tell you that even in college, there was some people that lacked some of the maturity to really be able to look beyond it. And in college, there was somebody who gave me the nickname of Nemo because I've got a smaller fin, right? Like in college. And yet I had to consistently just learn how to navigate it. But it
Yeah.
also created a lot of pain and therefore a lot of armor that I would protect myself with. Right. And it wasn't known at that time that I was protecting myself intellectually or emotionally in those ways. But yeah, I was being bullied and categorized in all these areas that I wasn't going to be capable of living life, and then being teased on the same token. Right. And so this was just a part of my story. It developed shame, it developed anger and resentment that I didn't know about, didn't realize. It developed patterns of protection for myself that kept me very, very disconnected from others for a long time. These were all things that I had to learn and grow through. And yet I also had lots of amazing friends through all of those same periods. And so it's not like it was all bad, but yeah, teasing was a big component that I had to really start to understand. And in most cases, it was about not absorbing the narrative as if I was what was wrong in the environment, but starting to recognize and realize that it was really highlighting the discomfort and the insecurity in other people. And therefore, that was where the pain would come through their actions.
Yeah, and what you're saying right now is very wise and smart with the way you look at it. When you were in college, did you have this thought process?
In which thought process specifically?
Basically, what you just said, like how other people who are bullying you, they're insecure about themselves, and to know
Yeah.
that it's really not you.
I started to adopt that and understand that in college, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I was able to completely disregard the teasing.
Of
Right. I mean,
course.
I'm still in a developmental stage and in college, right? Like, though I was never really insecure about my body to the point that I would not expose it. But it's like going to the pool, going to beaches, growing up in Arizona, being a tennis pro, going to school in Southern California. I'm outside all the time. I like to wear tank tops. Right. Like, but there was also a lot of like body image challenges that I had to learn through high school and college because why? I have a thicker build on the other side. I put on muscle really quickly. Like, of course, I want to have pecs and have the balance and that V'd muscular back that I know I'm capable of having. And therefore, right, like that was where it kind of came up is I would almost overperform to compensate for the areas that I was lacking. That again also
Really?
created some pain. But in college, like when the Nemo name came out, like it didn't rattle me. I wasn't like rocked and super upset. It was through the lens of like, okay, this is clearly not about me. Like, and I could find the humor in it and I could diffuse it in a different way. Certainly not to the level that I operate today. I mean, I'm in a completely different mode now, going on 40, turning 40 this year. It's just a different lens that I view the world through. And the things that I really care about or that stick are far less. But yeah, 20, 21, 18, 19, like you're still establishing some identity and sense of self and relational identity. And how do we interact with each other? And how are we connecting and communicating? And, teasing just was something that I was able to separate. But again, that doesn't mean that even at that point that there weren't moments that it still hurt. It
Yes.
hurt because I'm being labeled and categorized based on something that literally happened to me, has nothing to
Mhm.
do with who I am. Right. And yet that's so often what the world sees is what we do, or however they want to define us independent of who we are. And that's where it can be really isolating.
Yeah, I want to talk about your like okay, so your deep emotion behind it. So what you're saying right now, I it's super wise and I think like that too when it comes to like my eye and just overall body image and such. There's times where like deep down and we're going to talk about like the trash and in the back and such where I have moments where I just like get so angry and the reason I get angry is because it's the feeling of it's so unfair. Like I was born like this with my right eye.
Yep.
I got glaucoma when I was 17, and now forever I'm on medication and doctors, and it's like I get
Yep.
it's so much. It's hard,
It is
and
hard. Yeah.
it's hard. And then the disease that I have is like they say it's like an old people disease
Mm.
because it's most likely to happen in senior citizens. I literally even had a doctor when I was telling her like all my medical history. She was like, "You have glaucoma," and I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh, isn't that like an?" She's like, "Isn't that like an old people disease?" That's what she said to me, and I was like, "Yeah, life's great." Like when she said it to me, I was like, "Wow, thank you for reminding me
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's super rare for a 17-year-old." Like what I mean, yeah, like over 10 years ago. But yeah, it's just like in majority of my life, I wasn't angry because I'm still very grateful I have my left eye, right? Because if I didn't have my left eye, then it's like I'm blind. So I went through my whole life like that, but I didn't realize that I was suppressing all of my anger my whole life. And when I was starting having problems with my medication, it wasn't working. I was getting red eye, and this was like pretty recent, like less than 2 years ago. I was dealing for yeah, it was pretty bad. I should do a whole episode on that for myself. That I actually had like a huge mental breakdown with my parents. And my mom, thing is, I never did ever with my mom because she blames herself. And last thing I want to do is make her feel bad for something that is not her fault. And it's not her fault. I mean, she did everything right when she was pregnant. And even the doctor said that it's a fluke or whatever. And I never, ever, ever been mad at her. There's and I always tell her all the time, all these years. And so since that, I had to be strong for my mom every time I go to these appointments because she will always be very emotional. So I'm 29 now. All of these years, I just suppressed it. And about 2 years ago, I blew. I completely blew. So before we get into that, because I want to hear all of like your wisdom of that, because I feel like you can kind of help me out with that. You know what I mean? Have you
Yeah.
like what I'm telling you? Like, have you suppressed all of like that fear and anger yourself?
Yeah. I did for 20 to 25 years and didn't know it. I mean,
And
that's a part of my story as well. I talk often about how much I learned in different periods of my journey, and how for so long I believed that like the injury, the accident was my transformation story. But truly, it was just the story that created a bunch of trash from my past that I pushed through and pushed down for years. Right? What is trash from my past? It's the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, environmental conditioning that have created a set of beliefs that my life is only further validating. Right. And, I created this mental narrative because as I was being rejected and bullied and not seen and understood in so many elements early on, right, it was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And I went on this whole pathway of just mindset, mental toughness, but that also meant I was truly looking at it purely from performance. And it was to prove to everyone else, and in all honesty, to prove to myself that I could do those things anyway. Right. I rebroke my arm when I was 20 in a snowboarding injury, almost lost it again, and went 10 months with it hanging by my side, went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me. And I talked about Mark Gottlieb earlier. Funny enough, 10 months later, he was the one who did the soft tissue surgery to repair me again at 20, right? Like years later. And he remembered the map he'd outlined and how he built my arm, which is what scared everybody else. But in that period, I was really isolated. I was super lonely. I was really disconnected. I got like really depressed, and I got resentful and angry in that window
Mm,
because it was in a period where I had been helping so many people. I had all these relationships that I felt like I'd done things for. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm isolated and alone. And I started to get resentful and angry at them. And then I had to surrender to the reality of the fact that they just bought into the power of my narrative. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And what they did was added a layer to that, which was, oh, and he'll ask for help if he needs it. But I didn't know how to ask for help. And I certainly didn't have the courage to ask for help. Right. And so I go on this next journey of trying to rediscover who I am and get to the core of who I am and live my life around these ways. But I didn't have a healthy model for chasing who. I had a healthy model for chasing what house, what car, what amount of money. Right. And I had all those things by 27. Had a $10 million business. We were growing. Things were great. But I realized that I had all the what's I ever wanted: the house, the car, the money, amazing wife, unbelievable business. But it cost me who I was. My bank account was full. And now all of a sudden I find myself empty. And that's when I started to really do some of the internal work to start to unpack the fact that I'd been dealing with shame for a long time. Shame that was showing up and impacting my relationships, my business, and other things. It wasn't until 32 that I had a moment on the couch with my daughter that I'd even been doing this work and starting to unpack it. But she caused such an emotional moment with me as we'd been laughing and playing. And she kissed me on the cheek and says, "I love you, Dada." And I broke down into tears. And I want to be clear when I say that I think that tears are a sign of strength for men. True strength, I think, hides behind vulnerability. But at the same time, I also learned and conditioned tears out of my ability a long time ago. And I shut off tears. So as I'm sitting there in this moment, realizing how profound this feeling is and how it's making everything else I'd ever experienced in my life pale in comparison, I started to pay attention to the fact that when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I shut off mental pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain for 25 years and just didn't know it. So I say all this because through this whole period of time, I did not even know that I had anger. It wasn't until 35 years old that I had to face that for the first time, probably in a process that my wife had been trying to get me to see for a decade prior. But 99% of the world didn't even know I was an angry person. Why? Because I was really good at keeping it tight and aligned and contained. But guess what? That also meant that the people that were closest to me are the ones that got dumped on, and I didn't even know what was happening. I was unconscious to so many things that would take place, and it would show up in moments like my wife saying, "Hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend?" But my shame and my anger filter would cause me to hear it this way: "Hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently, so what are you going to do to make up for it this weekend?" To which point I'd immediately react and I'd rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last few days to show her I'm a good husband and father. And now I've created damage because that wasn't even what she said. See, here's
Yeah.
what I did have to learn. And the anger piece I faced only in the last 4 to 5 years. I didn't see it. I didn't know it. I didn't even know I was an angry person. But here's the thing to pay attention to: anger is not a primary emotion, it's a secondary emotion. Anger, the sole intent of anger is big energy to push everything and everyone away from you in order to keep you safe, or the perception of having safety. But what it also does is it creates a lot of ripple effect of damage that keeps us in that low frequency fear and anger and shame state, and unable to elevate ourselves to actually seeing what's happening right in front of us. And it's all this conditioned stuff. Now, what did I have anger about? I lived in daily physical pain for nearly 31 years. I had a flawed relationship with my body. I had flawed relationships with money, even though I'd produced and built an incredible business. And I had all this hidden anger that really was tied to shame and not being able to step into understanding, sadness and grieving and other pieces that it was connected to. And so for me, anger and ego are both armor, and they protect pain. And so that's when I started to deconstruct like understanding of like, why are we not always clear in having our intent be understood when we try to communicate it to the world? And if we think about it in a really simple way, right, we all seek and desire 4 things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected, and those are not the same thing. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to feel connected. But the second we walk into an environment that we don't feel seen and understood and connected or protected at a level, what do? We protect ourselves, right? So this could be all the environments that I'd walked in and through with all of my peers for all these years that didn't totally understand or labeled or bullied me. It could be going to a networking event and everybody wants something from me instead of for me, handing out business cards. It could be going back to family's house for the holidays and knowing that your dad, your grandma are going to look at you a certain way, and you start protecting yourself weeks ahead because you just don't want to feel yucky, right? Like, imagine that 35-gallon black trash bag, because the second we protect ourselves, imagine a black trash bag unfolded and flat. Pick it up and hold it up in front of your face. That's now your armor. Now the
Yeah.
question becomes, with this black opaque armor, this force field that's in front of you, how could you properly expect anybody, especially the ones that you care about, to see who you are, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your heart, your intent, your soul, your desires, your boundaries, your value, your worth, delivered through this opaque force field? And that's assuming they're not carrying their own. That's going to further dilute the message. And so I started to realize that anger was a reaction, but it was a defensive and protective reaction. right? The second we go into a place where we start to protect ourselves, or sometimes even protecting others, we actually guarantee that we're going to disconnect ourselves from the two things we want most, to be seen and understood and connected at the deepest level. And ultimately, we're going to be disconnected from who we are and what we want. And so sometimes it's not, it could literally, what was I protecting in that moment with my wife? I was protecting the fact that I am a really good husband and father, and I take a lot of pride in it. But I felt like I was being challenged when in fact I was just being asked, what do we want to do this week? Right. And so when we start to realize that our armor disconnects us, it causes us to not be able to see and hear and feel things accurately to what's right in front of us. And most of the time it's because we're reacting to something in the past or that cellular memory that gets activated in that moment of reaction. Right. And so everything that I've had to do was to be able to unpack these things, because the mere idea that anything I would have done would have created an environment that was anything other than making my family feel safe and protected was like viscerally disturbing to me. It wrecked me. And so I made a promise to my family, and I've done the work. And the way I look at it today, it took about 18 months to really start to break some of the patterns, with only a handful of situations that took place otherwise. But I'm very proud today. I sit here and I say often that I had anger and I had shame in ways that the world didn't know about for years. But my wife and I have been together for 18 years now. We hid from
Awesome.
each other unconsciously for 14, behind those layers of armor and protection
Really?
that neither one of us saw. Right. And she's only felt emotionally safe with me for about 36 months. It's also not a coincidence that we have the best marriage, the best relationship, the best level of communication, the highest amount of intimacy, and I don't just mean that sexually, right? And all the way through, we've broken generational patterns in our home. My kids don't remember having an angry father in my home, or like at all. And there's been progress and growth, but also as I worked through the anger and actually got to the things and the pieces that I needed to unpack and work through and heal, I've now been virtually physically pain free for almost exactly 2 years. And it had nothing to do with anything external that I did. It had everything to do with what the internal elements I was able to access and heal, and how
Mhm.
much more congruently I was able to live my life on the other side. 2 years, zero physical pain after 31 years of daily pain that debilitated my quality of life. It's a completely different outlook, and it's a completely different way of experiencing life on the other side of anger, shame, fear, resentment, control, scarcity. They're all tied to those same components. So today I just want to help individuals identify and remove the waste they don't know exists within, so they can step into their power and potential and not allow it to affect them in a negative way anymore.
Yeah, and it definitely does take that long. Like I said, it took me, I guess, 25 years for that. And you were talking about how you about feeling safe and such. And when you were talking, I was kind of thinking back on current challenges that I deal with, because I'm trying to like learn from you, because I am in a position where I'm still struggling with the whole I thing and feeling safe. And I'm doing a little bit better 'cause I've been doing like this certain type of actually, this is like another guest that I had. He has like a certain program, and I'm like his guinea pig for his new one coming out, and it's been helping a little bit when it comes to like calming like the mind. And actually it's called, I think it's called Beyond Trash. It's a little similar. It's like a spiritual way, and it's pretty much like controlling the mind so it doesn't go into like a dark place, because that's what puts you in a position where it holds you back and such. So like, I do want to know, because you're talking about how you heal from that, and the last 2 years you increased your quality of life, right? I want to know like what you did. So you said you worked internally, but can you like give
Yeah.
me like a step that you did or an example?
Yeah. I mean, our whole waste to wealth philosophy and the five pillars that we teach today are essentially the journey that I went through. I'll condense it in a really simplified fashion for just a minute. You have to raise your level of awareness. That's the first pillar, is literally awareness. But the way that I approach awareness is, it's not just helping people become more aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves, instead of understanding what to do about it. Right. So understanding literally situationally, what are the thoughts, what are the feelings, what are the experiences, do we have awareness of self? How congruently is our awareness aligned with how other people see us? Like, it's literally raising our awareness around the ways that we feel and understand ourselves at a deeper level, and the stories that have been kind of told. But like, until I became aware of the fact that I was dealing with shame or anger, I can't do anything with it. Right. I
Hmm.
mean, you cannot be intentional with anything that you're unaware of. And so that is, and always is, even from a cliche standpoint, the first step. The next step, though, is what I call ownership. And this is about taking and forcing yourself to shift your perspective and try to find a way where you can own or take responsibility for everything that's ever happened in and around your life. right? The goal here is perspective, but we've got to remove shame and blame from the equation. Why do I say that? Because shame and blame prevent opportunity and growth, period. If we understand David Hawkins' frequency and scale of frequency, shame is the lowest registrable frequency at about 20 on a scale of 700. 90% of the world are stuck between 100 and 150, which is anger and fear. Courage is about 400, self-actualization is about 700. So the second you wake up and you're in a shame and blame state, or you start blaming yourself, or you view it through failure, or you even use the word should. I should have done this better. Should's a shame-based word. It implies whoever you are, whatever you're doing, it's not good enough. But ownership is about shifting ourselves into this place where we can actually own it. And ultimately, when we have reactions, we create damage. That example I gave of my wife, I created damage. Part of ownership is also creating repair, right? Which takes more time, more energy, but it's really important to neutralize and diffuse those negative energies on both sides before we can have progress moving forward. One of the first things I did when we were unpacking anger in my process, I went down and I sat with a lot of the people that are in our life that were important, that I cared about, that I wanted to really step into a level of ownership with. And her parents were one of the first conversations I had. Her dad reinforced one of the most important lessons I've been teaching my kids since they were born. But ultimately, he looked at me and he said, "Brian, you talk too much. Show me." At the
You
end of the
talk too much,
day,
show me.
you talk too much. Show me. Right? I basically
Okay.
went through this whole narrative where I said, "Look, this is what I've realized. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm planning. This is what she deserves. This is what your grandkids deserve. This is how I'm going to approach it. You talk
Okay.
too much, Brian. Show me." Right? And here's the reality. This is the lesson that's behind it. The world will never judge you based on your intent. The world will always judge you based on how your actions, behaviors, and words are communicating to the world, right? It's always action that comes down to it. And so that's where I had to shift into it even deeper. Unpacking is the third pillar. Unpacking here is really spending time getting into the weeds and actually identifying the source or sources of these patterns, of these emotions, of these derailing components that keep you in that low frequency state, right? I'm a very, very big believer that until we get to the source or sources, we do not change. And I've said for years that if we don't feel, we do not heal. And there's science that proves that. There's actually 40,000 cells in the heart called sensory neurites. They're brain-like cells that carry cellular memory. And they've shown that if you go through the intellectual process of unpacking the patterns of your past alone, and you don't embody the associated emotions, that those 40,000 cells don't heal, and neither do you. Right? So unpacking is actually getting ourselves down to the level of understanding what are the emotional, intellectual narratives? How do we trace this down to the physiological symptoms that take place in our body so that we can actually start to understand and feel? One of the most profound moments that I had in the week after I had discovered the anger was I drove by a pedestrian accident where there was a child that was run over. You can obviously imagine that ignited a whole bunch, especially timely for me, but it was a process that also allowed me to a stimulus externally that I don't believe was a coincidence in the timing, that allowed me to see things and understand things and unpack things that I didn't even realize I was angry about. Right. And so the importance of getting to the root or roots of these things, it's the only way we can eradicate them. The next step is what we call flip the lid. And this is about reclaiming through awareness, ownership, and unpacking real time in a moment. What is flipping the lid? It's moments where we can step into our thoughts, our feelings, our reactions, everything, lay it all out on the table without any judgment or criticism. So today, if my wife, for example, says something to me that triggers me, right, instead of reacting to it, I can simply say something like, "Hey, babe, I felt really triggered by what you said, which made me believe maybe I didn't hear you correctly. Can you say it again? I'll try to listen with more neutral lens. And if I can't, maybe can we pause this and revisit it later so that I can be in a better frame of mind and we don't create damage?" It's about claiming without any need to justify, defend, but just completely owning, right? Like where we're at in the current moment and ensuring that we're flipping the conversation in a way that allows us to have accuracy. The other piece to this, though, is that stage 3 REM sleep is where memory consolidation takes place. So we have a 5-minute process that's called scan the can. That's also a part of flip the lid, which is about going through and identifying those low frequency negative moments throughout the day where you got triggered and identifying the narratives that are around them and removing what's no longer going to serve you moving forward before you commit it more to future memory, right? This is also how we start to recreate new patterns. But the last step is where it all starts to come together. It's move. The 5th pillar is move. What does this mean? It's how do these emotions move through your body? How do they move through your world so you can move through them? What do I mean by that? Move through your body is literally the physiological patterns of how they show up, right? So in the case with my wife, I would feel a racing of my heart. My breath would get shallow. My chest would puff. I'd feel the wave of heat come from my head. I'd feel a lockup in my jaw, right? And I would be able to identify this. The reason I say physiological patterns, even more than just labeling it with emotion, is they show up differently. Shame shows up in my body 5 or 6 different ways. Anger shows up in my body 5 or 6 different ways. If I don't know those patterns, how am I ever going to escape them? Again, it comes back to the awareness piece. So now that I have these in here, this is the beginning part of what I call trigger mapping. How do they move through my world? What are the moments that actually put me into that triggered state? right? A great example is I've got 3 little dogs. 2 of them have Chihuahua in them. And when the doorbell goes off, their high pitched little yappers start going crazy and it puts me into sensory overload like nobody's business. But it shows up in my body like anger. And I want to yell at these dogs. But here's the difference. I'm not really angry, nor am I angry at anyone in the environment, but it shows up that way. And that's the energy that I'm carrying. If I don't know those patterns and can separate and release it within minutes and moments, what happens when one of my 2 special needs kids comes and jumps in my lap? What energy do you think they're going to get if that happens right after and I haven't cleared it? They're going to feel the anger, the frustration, that heightened low frequency energy that has nothing to do with them. And they're going to have a narrative in their own self about what this means because of how dad's interacting with them. The only way we move through these things is if we start to understand them at a granular level so that we can actually escape the patterns. And this is the work that I've done. And this is a lot of the work that I teach to really be able to help people step into presence and the current state of their life versus this constant state of reacting to the trash from their past without them having any knowledge about it.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I was like wondering because like when you're talking about like the barking, right? And how you're overstimulated. Lately I have been acting like the exact same way and I just get a lot of anger. And then I guess I had that moment of shame where I get upset with myself. I'm like, why am I feeling so angry? And then I just try to just pretty much not move or do anything or put myself in a different room because I don't want to like scream at other people or pretty much bark at other people or and there's times where my boyfriend is he's very active and such, and so there's times where I can get triggered, not because I don't think it has it has nothing to do with him. He's
Sure, it
just being
doesn't.
himself.
Yep.
But then part of me is like, you're being so annoying. But also, it's like, I don't want him, I don't want to be mean.
Yeah.
So I'm.
See, there's a lot wrapped up in that, my friend, and I think we could go a few different directions on it. But I think what you're talking about is like you're attempting to get yourself back into the present moment and really understand again the source or sources of what you're reacting to, because intellectually it's not him, but emotionally it doesn't feel that way. Right. And that's
Yes.
where a lot of the interference and resistance can come from, is when we have a lack of alignment between our intellectual beliefs and our emotional beliefs or experience. And so often what I do is I give people 3 questions, at least in the moment of trigger. Doesn't give all the answers, but it allows you to separate in the moment. Right. So the next time you get triggered, I ask people all the time, it's like, do you know what it feels like to get triggered? They're like, oh, yeah, totally. How quickly do you know? Oh, almost immediately. Yeah, we all do. We all do. We all do. Right. And so we know when that's going to be the case. And so I always tell people the next time you get triggered, pause, take a breath, and ask these 3 questions. The first is what I'm reacting to right now due to what's right in front of me or the trash from my past?
Mm-hmm.
Here's a little secret, like 98 to 99% of the time, it's the second. Okay. The second question, if that in and of itself hasn't allowed you to center and try to see things accurately and clearly for what's right in front of you, is what am I protecting right now? Because once you're in a triggered state, your defense and your armor goes up. Whatever the emotion or narrative is behind it, you start protecting yourself, which means you're disconnecting yourself, and it puts you into a reactionary state. So if you can identify, what am I protecting right now? Just like in that moment with my wife, what was I protecting? I was protecting the fact that being a good husband and father is really important to me, and I felt like it was being challenged. I didn't like to be challenged. Why? Because my truth was never accepted. People didn't believe my truth. So now I feel like I have to yell or make myself louder to force my truth through, which was a technique I learned, which would come across as anger, even if I wasn't actually angry. But I have to understand what's the root of what am I protecting in any given moment, because if I can identify that, I can realize it has nothing to do with what's in front of me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, if I can't separate between those 2 questions, it's, am I safe right now? Am I safe mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally? And if I can look around and I can say, yep, I'm safe in this moment, then I can artificially start to intentionally lower my armor, even if there's something still behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But what are we trying to do? Create no damage, bring ourselves into as much presence and reality as possible, and ultimately be able to distinguish between what our bodies, our minds, and our emotions are trying to convince us is true versus what's actually true right in front of us.
And I feel like a lot of people that struggle is over explaining. That's one thing that, and also I don't know if you notice at all. I like talk really fast. I stop what I say and I do something else, and then you're like, yes, I'm noticing. And this is, I am working on it. I think my challenge was like, I don't know what to do. I'm sitting here with all these emotions and all this anger, and I was like, I want to do better. I want to, like, heal and just be happy and just have a good quality of life. Because honestly, like, when I was reading about you, I was thinking to myself, like, I know and what I'm doing, but I get so like frustrated. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? It's like how do I don't know if I'm using the right word, using
Yeah,
like push through it, or I know you definitely know what I'm saying, because
I
this is literally
do.
exactly what you do.
The piece I want to reflect back to you, and I mean this with, there is zero criticism that's wrapped in this. I used to be on the receiving end of, for lack of a better term, ageism, right? And so I want to be really clear, like when I reference your age, it's not from a negative or a just be patient, but the fact that you're even thinking this way, the fact that you are conversing this way, the fact that you're asking yourself these questions at 29 and what sounds like really has been for a few years now, you are ahead of the curve. Trust me when I tell you that. There are so many people that I work with that in their 40s, 50s, and 60s are for the first time in their life actually trying to have honest conversations, to give themselves permission to live the lives they want and actually do the work to explore and excavate the shit that no longer serves them. And so I know that it can feel overwhelming, but what I'm also trying to reflect in this is that you clearly are also somebody, as from a high performance standpoint, that learned to receive love, validation, and connection in some components through performance. You learn to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, which means in a lot of ways in your mind, it's been contingent upon what you do instead of who you are. And
Yeah.
so you're even comparing the way that you're operating and where you're at to a potential future state or where you believe you should be, versus honoring and acknowledging where you are, where you've come from, the path that you took to get here, as well as where you continue to desire to go, but not that you should be there now. Again, should's a shame-based word. If you compare
Mhm.
yourself to where you believe you should be, you're immediately shaming and blaming yourself and preventing opportunity and growth. And so what I'm trying to highlight is this is just a slight shift in perspective, because if you can learn to honor and give yourself grace for where you are right now in this journey, which is ahead of the curve. And I know this because I've worked with thousands of people, right? The fact that you're having these conversations is ahead of the curve. Not totally unique. There are people in their 20s, lots of them, who do this work. But
Mhm.
largely, most people don't start asking these questions until later, if they ever do at all. And so for you, that's where I would suggest is stop comparing yourself to this ambiguous future state that you don't realize, and give yourself grace for where you are while still acknowledging without judgment the work that you still desire to do. And guess what?
Yeah.
There is no final destination, only constant evolution of self. I myself still do this work every day, right? Now I just spend less time in it than I used to. I'm in it minutes and moments versus having months and years of my life be impacted. I move through it quickly. It doesn't derail me. It doesn't take the same capacity and energy. I don't feel the same weight that I used to, right? But do I still feel these things, even things that I've unpacked and removed in a lot of cases? Yeah. Why? Because I'm human and we are
Yeah.
not perfect. But what I can also tell you, and this is a reflection for you just to help understand this, because I couldn't own this for a long time because I had to be humble. I had to do all these things and I was putting all these narratives on stuff. But people have asked me multiple times, Brian, do you believe you're self-actualized? If self-actualized. And here's the reality. I'm as self-actualized as I'm capable of being in this moment. I
Yeah.
don't know what you're determining self-actualization to look like. I don't know what you believe that pinnacle looks like, but I'm as self-actualized as I can be in this moment. But is there more opportunity to learn more tomorrow? Of course. Is there more opportunity to grow more tomorrow? Of course. And that's how I view things. I can only do with whatever I have up until this moment. Everything else is opportunity and growth if I allow myself to receive it.
You are so spot on. Everything you just said about me is something I needed to hear. And what you've noticed. Looking at your face, you're like, yep, absolutely. And I definitely do say the word should. I'm like, oh, and I always just like, oh, I should be here. I should have these many listeners and this. And it's like, I need to recognize where I am today. I mean, 3 years ago, I was miserable at a 9 to 5, right? And then I managed to get out, thankfully. And
And some people never escape the 9 to 5 that they hate. Again,
right?
right?
And it's not easy being self-employed and an entrepreneur, and which a lot of people don't understand. You know what I mean? Like they don't see like it can be hard and but I do want to say that I am proud of myself on where I am. Like I do have moments where you just saw the side of me where I was saying pretty much like, oh, I should be here and then shaming myself. But then I also have moments where I'm like, okay, Justine, you got to be proud of yourself
Yeah.
that where I am today and what I'm doing because I do have social anxiety and here I am talking to strangers every day
Yeah.
for a living,
Guess what? I
which
have social anxiety as well, and I didn't know it until I was in my 30s. And I'm really
same.
good with people, and I'm not afraid to be in front of people, but I do get social anxiety, particularly in certain
Right.
situations.
And
No
there's
doubt.
yeah, and
Yep.
there's different types of social anxiety as well. People think that people who are shy, which of course has social anxiety as well, but I've noticed recently in my 20s that, oh wow, I have it too, because people kept telling me I didn't. Growing up, people were like, Justine, you do not have social anxiety. You talk to everybody. You're so friendly. But now I'm realizing, okay, if I'm feeling anxious talking to people that I don't know, I think I got a little anxiety right there, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and I, you know,
But you
I
learned how to play the game early, and you learned how to navigate the world in a way that was personable and relatable and accessible because of the limitations and all the places that you'd been cut off or gapped in the past. Right. And so that's the piece too, is again, the world that they did the same thing to me. They do the same thing to people, whether they have challenges like you and I have had or not. Right.
mhm.
We grow up as we're born as our most brightest, most authentic burning light. And then the world starts saying, you should do this. You shouldn't do this. You should be this. You shouldn't be this. You should want this. You shouldn't want that. You should have this kind of job. You should make this kind of money. You should drive this kind of car. You should have this kind of house, live in this kind of community. Right. And should like literally start shaping people into this box based on who the world has told them who to be instead of who they are. Right. Telling people, I've got a client
Wow.
right now that I'm working with who is on the autism spectrum, but he's been told his entire life that doesn't feel emotion and doesn't have emotions. First of all, I've got a son on the spectrum. I myself am likely on the spectrum, and it's quite the contrary. My son is more emotional, has more emotions. He just doesn't know how to relate them or interpret them in the same ways. But my client was told for 40 years that he wasn't emotional, even though he's deeply emotional. So he convinced himself he wasn't, yet he's got a crazy amount of emotional intelligence. And when given the opportunity, he can communicate about it. When you're being told you don't have social anxiety, but yet you're feeling something that's not congruent to that, that's the world trying to tell you something about yourself that you've not allowed your own voice to be louder on.
And equals to that shame that you're talking about this whole time.
Exactly.
Wow. No, that's true. And everyone who's listening, I hope that honestly has lit a light bulb in their head, like, oh, so this is kind of where shame is rooted from. And it's because everything, like growing up too, when I was bullied, I was constantly being called stupid, ugly, and weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are and I remember it so well because it's like those three things. I was called stupid because I guess I was just slower at learning and such, but I was actually called stupid before it was like as a child, literally before even grade school, pretty much. And I was getting like not the best grades, like I'll pass, but I'll get like a D or something. And
Yeah.
so that would confirm what they were saying about me. And so that's something I have worked past because I would think, oh, I'm so stupid, I can't do because everything that we're doing is not, what like you're saying with the high performer, like it's not what everybody does. And I gotta take away this narrative that I'm stupid. And I
Yeah.
realized I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
I'm not. And then just, could that held me back? Let me tell you how much that held me back. You want to know
100%.
something? Confidence wise, when I started high school, everybody was doing, like sports and extracurriculars. I did not do anything because I believed that I couldn't do anything because I'm stupid
Which were not
and
your narratives to begin with. They were the ones that were
oh
placed on you by other people, right? And that's the
yeah.
pattern that happens is like often even in helping people separate these things and helping them realize is it's like, okay, whose voice was that? Whose voice was that? Whose standard was that? Whose belief system was that? Whose narrative was that? And when you can start to separate some of these things and realize, oh, that was my dad, that was my grandma, that was how things showed up in school. These weren't
Mhm.
my beliefs. Then it's a matter of, okay, how do I deconstruct the patterns that are attached to these narratives that were placed on me? And how do I start to live fully into alignment with what I believe and with what and how I value things, people, and the world, right? It's oftentimes just giving yourself permission to actually step into what it is that you want for the very first time outside of the criticism, judgment, shame, or need to justify, protect, or defend anything about yourself. Again, the second we protect ourselves, we
Mhm.
guarantee we will disconnect ourselves. That's universal to all of these things. And yet,
Yeah.
why? Why are we protecting ourselves? Because we've been receiving judgment, criticism, and shame in all these areas for our whole life, being told we're not good enough, that we are going to operate a certain way because someone else has told us. Pardon my language, but fuck that. What's your truth? That's literally the existence that I have now. My purpose, my reason for being on this planet is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this is why you do what you do, why you have your podcast. And I literally have this podcast to bring people like you know, with your stories and everything that you went through and just the challenges, because I want to show proof. That's literally what my podcast is about, is like I only make sure I bring people on that is actual proof, because if people relate to the story and then hear that there is a way to recover and to have a really happy, fulfilling life, it gives them the hope and the motivation that they can do the same thing,
Yeah, that's right.
right?
Yep.
So I want to talk about your podcast, because you have a podcast too. So
Mm-hmm.
what can we learn from that? Because for everything I've heard from you today, it makes me very interested in listening to your
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. Our podcast is called Flipping the Lid, and the whole concept of it is to normalize the conversations that need to be had and
Mhm.
featuring some of the most impactful and influential people on this planet, but not just simply showing the highlight reels, but really going through the journey, right? Unpacking the moments of struggle, unpacking where shame kept them back, where they were protecting themselves. I don't have a regimented question list that I go through. I have a very conversational style. But what I do see very common is a lot of the same unique, but not unique human experiences and patterns that so many high performers or service based entrepreneurs or impact makers or people who were in positions of shame and restriction or whatever, right? To be able to share their stories in a way that can tap into the collective wisdom for other people to access, right? Because I can talk about these things universally for myself, I can teach the frameworks, but I don't represent every story that someone might experience these same things with, right? But a woman who was on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse and now helps people women step into their voice and get clarity and break the patterns and generational patterns of narcissism, right? To affect the damage and pain in them. She speaks in a way that even if it's the same concepts, it won't be as accessible through me. And so, no different than what you're attempting to do. I'm not trying to prove anything that I already know is real. I'm trying to make it accessible and normal in the fact that being vulnerable and talking about these things is actually the greatest thing we can do. The greatest strength and the greatest connecting fiber for us all is to drop that armor and step into truth. Right. And I equate a lot of this back to this concept of protector connector and strong spine, soft front, which I didn't go into detail on. But essentially, it's once you know who you are, what you're capable of, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your hope, your intent, your desires, your value, your worth, your boundaries, all of these things, then you can be unwavering in any environment. It's kind of like Eminem at the end of the movie 8 Mile when he goes off on that last rap battle, right when he's about to believe he's going to get shredded, and he goes, "Yeah, I did come across from the track. Yeah, my buddy did shoot himself. Yeah, I did do all these things, but guess what? He dropped the mic at the end, and his competition had nothing on him." Once you can get yourself to a place where you have nothing to justify, protect, or defend in your life, because you're so centered and clear in who you are, what you believe, how you operate, you live congruently to those things, you have nothing to defend, nothing to justify, nothing to protect, which means you can actually effectively live in a way that you lower your armor. That's what the show's all about, is helping people realize that protecting ourselves or perceivably protecting ourselves is actually the thing that's hurting us the most.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of people, I mean, they say it's a defense mechanism, and I see so much of that. I want to say that I'm so glad that people like you exist and what you're doing for a living, because we need more people to help others overcome that, because there's a lot of people who get defensive very easily, and it's exactly what you were saying. They're defending something that they went through in the past and not even realizing it. It's also
Mm-hmm.
conscious. So I want to first say thank you for coming on, giving me all of your wisdom and helping me out a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate that. I will put all your information in the description, such as I believe your website pretty much is like the hub for everything, right?
Yeah, you can find almost everything
Uh,
in our world there. Yeah.
right. So I'll put your website in the description so people can check you out. But again, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today.
Justine, thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate it. And yeah, I just want everybody to know, like, the truth will set you free.
Literally.
You just have to have the courage and desire to find it, stand in it, and unpack it, as well as redefine what your future truth will look like. But freedom, joy, fulfillment, all the positive sides of life are possible on the other side of doing this work.